Hey everyone, welcome to Mostly Peaceful Media. I'm Julio Rosas, and with me today is David Bier. He is the Director of Immigration Studies at the CATO Institute. He's someone who has a lot of experience talking about this. He's someone this is a day-to-day job. You might have seen him testifying a lot on Capitol Hill, especially during the second Trump administration, since there's been a lot of hearings about that, usually as a witness for the Democrats. So, David, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Sure, happy to talk.
All right. So just to start out, because I'm curious as well, what got you interested in the topic of immigration?
Well, I was initially coming to DC to work on environmental policy, and it turns out that the major anti-immigration groups in DC were all founded by the same radical environmentalist named John Tanton, who was motivated by the desire to reduce population, advocate for the one-child policy in China, believed that more people meant fewer resources for the rest of us, and that more immigration and more people generally would make the country poorer and more polluted and more uh, just problematic for the rest of the country that remained. And so it was really that interest in population more generally that got me involved in immigration and the study of immigration specifically, using that as a gateway.
All right. Now it's safe to say that you are a heavy critic of the Trump administration's policies, especially during his second term. So, for you though, what would be your, if you were in charge of the nation's immigration policy, if you could just summarize, because I know it could
Sure.
we could go up, but if you could summarize, what would your ideal immigration policy be for the United States? Like how many people would you want to allow in per year, and like how many of those people would be able to be provided like a pathway to citizenship?
Yeah, so my view is that we should have a presumption of openness as long as people are coming for peaceful reasons and they're coming to do peaceful things with Americans here. The government shouldn't be able to veto that. And the amount would be set by markets, set by individuals, households, and employers would set the limits based on their needs and their willingness to sell property or rent property or build homes and so forth. And so population would be determined by private actors, not governments. And so far, for the last 100 years, we've had government in charge. It hasn't worked out well. I don't think anyone's really satisfied
Yep.
with the results. Prior to the 1920s, the market and the American people were in charge of immigration policy. We could invite who we wanted, we could sell to who we wanted. We didn't have the government coming in and imposing those mandates. Obviously, this is at a very high level of abstraction. We are 100 million years away from that vision, but there are many things that we could do to make legal immigration much easier and much fairer for not just the immigrants, but for Americans who want to associate and contract and trade with people around the world in many different capacities. And the government's job is ultimately to protect our rights to engage in that commerce and that trade and that freedom of association, not to impede it.
Right. What I would say though, because obviously, as you said, like the 1920s is kind of where that change from markets to government. But I mean, certainly the migration patterns have certainly changed a lot since then because, before it was people coming from Europe through Ellis Island, and through that. And now today it's more people coming from the south, the southern border and things like that. So how would you envision being able to control that? Because, through one port of entry, Ellis Island is a lot more manageable than say 2,000 miles of a border with Mexico. And that's obviously not including the airports as well, like the like those types of hubs.
I don't see it as a problem at all. We live in a modern world where immigrants are more than willing to pay for visas and travel documents that would cover the cost of expanding our ports of entry. They would be happy to do that right now. At least under the Biden administration, you had however many billions of dollars flowing to smugglers and traffickers in Mexico. It would have been much better for the United States if that money had just been offered to cover the costs of processing them through legal means, and better for national security, many other reasons as well, to advocate for that. So I don't see it as a practical problem. In reality, the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, they process hundreds of millions of people coming into the United States are processed through customs every year. And so it's not a practical limitation on how many people can they process and screen. It's really a political question, basically, that the government has decided we're only going to allow them to do these types of activities when they get here. We're only going to let them stay for 90 days. We're only going to let them, visit Disneyland, and then they have to leave. They're not allowed to work or contribute, is really the main restriction that the political class seems to care about, is preventing them from contributing to the United States economically. And I think that's the most harmful of all the policies that DC enforces on the rest of us.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that because that speaks to the broader question about like the contributions and all that. But obviously, the big topic for the second Trump administration, because the first one was really dominated by building the border wall and securing the border, and that was kind of like the big main fight. And so now today, because especially in the aftermath of the Biden-Harris border crisis, ICE, Border Patrol is the hot topic. That's the one that's talked about. And so, with the topic of what we do with ICE, right? Obviously, the Trump administration is saying we're going to supercharge it. We've given them all these billions of dollars. We're giving them a lot more leeway in who they can
Mhm.
arrest, and obviously that's been pushed back. You're one of those staunch critics of their tactics, and so according to the today's Kalshi market, the odds of things like mandatory body cams passing Congress is at 10%, visible ID is at 4.9%, a
Yeah.
mask ban is at 4%, and abolishing ICE is at 1.9%. Obviously, the odds are very low this year because both chambers are controlled by Republicans. It will be interesting to see what those odds will be, if Democrats take back either the Senate and the House, and moving forward with that. So what would you want? I mean, because I know that you've
Yeah.
been a very very heavy critic of ISIS tactics. So for example, I know you're not in favor of the mask ban, or I'm sorry, you're not in favor of them wearing masks.
Yeah.
Why is that? Given the threat environment that a lot of federal agents, not just ICE, but a lot of federal agents are facing because of what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, so look, I'm not in favor of abolishing ICE, and I'm not in favor of abolishing borders. I described a legal immigration framework for people to come. I want people to be here legally and contribute legally. This effectively the exact opposite view of the Trump administration, which is taking away people's legal status to open themselves up for deportation, and doesn't want them to be able to contribute to the country economically. So I what I want from law enforcement is not just immigration and customs enforcement. I don't want my local cops to be wearing masks either. I don't want, DEA agents. It doesn't. This is not a specific criticism leveled
Well,
at ICE. They're just the
well,
only
right, but
ones. They're
that's
just the only ones going around wearing masks, not identifying themselves, not acting like normal law enforcement. You go back to the 19th century when uniforms were first imposed on police against their will. The police didn't want to wear the uniforms. They liked, looking like citizens and being completely anonymous. The reason why we ultimately overcame that objection is because it professionalized the police. It really imposed accountability on police in a way that they didn't have when it looked like they were just a random person on the street. The other reason to be in favor of it is for exactly what you mentioned. There are more threats to ICE now than in the past. And one of the things that actually gives officers more authority, makes them more respected by the people that they're trying to arrest or interact with, is the fact that they're wearing a uniform, the fact that they look like law enforcement, actually increases compliance. And so if you want people to respect you, you should look respectable. And they don't look. I mean, they're walking around in hoodies and masks and they don't look respectable, and it's actually leading to a backlash against their tactics and against what they're doing. Even in cases where I would agree, like sometimes they're going after sex offenders and
Right.
violent people. I mean, there's not everything that they do is reprehensible, but even in those cases, there are people who are getting in their way and yelling at them and
Being
otherwise
violent,
interacting
yes.
with them in ways that they wouldn't if they knew what they were doing was protecting the public in the interest of public safety and so forth. And so this gets into the whole topic of what ICE should be doing with their time. But even if we, mass deportation, we just arrest anybody that, doesn't have the right paperwork. Um, Even if we have that framework, I would still say we don't want mass, both for the safety of the officer, but also for the public, so that they know who they are, there's accountability, and there's respectability in law enforcement.
I mean, I would push back on this idea that if they had a standardized uniform, because I know that's also been proposed where, instead of them having just street clothes and then a vest and then an ID, just because of what we saw in 2020, right? I mean, when I was outside Minneapolis PD, in the third precinct right after George Floyd's death, people were still out there and attacking cops, even though they're out there in the uniform. And that's an extreme example, but we see it all. I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, all you got to do is look at all the many YouTube channels that are dedicated to police body camera footage, and a lot of it's just state trooper, local police, and you see people escalate to the umpth degree over what should be maybe it's just a speeding ticket or maybe it's just a regular citation, and they just completely flip out because I just think, especially in the aftermath of 2020, there's just this really big sentiment, especially on the left, of being anti-law enforcement to varying degrees, but there's this general anti-law enforcement. And one of the reasons why ICE is really in the spotlight is because they're front and center of one of President Trump's main, policies. And so I really don't think even just something as simple as having a uniform is going to somehow increase this like someone who's in the country legally, especially now. I mean, I think just at this point the cat's out of the bag. Like we can't really go back to how it was because people say, well, Obama was deporting people and there wasn't any kind of this mass reaction. And like, yeah, I agree. And it's because the left wasn't pushing that really as the big issue because they didn't want to touch it. Because yes, the president was actually really doing pretty heavy enforcement in certain areas. So I don't agree with that sentiment, especially because I mean we even saw last year in Axios when they reported that House Democrats were hearing from their constituents pretty concerning rhetoric about how, yeah, you need to be willing to get shot specifically outside of these ICE facilities. Like you need to go in and charge. Like we want blood. And House Democrats are telling Axios like that's something we've never heard before.
Yeah.
When we're
Yeah,
talking
no, I
about
mean, I don't think we
right,
disagree. I don't think we
yeah,
disagree on keeping officers safe. I don't want people to be attacked. I don't
right.
support that. I just disagree with the idea that we want to go down this path of making all law enforcement anonymous and not looking like law enforcement. I mean, that is the unprofessionalization of law enforcement. And the public on this is correct. I mean, this is one of the areas where they're actually, quite aligned with the Democrats and thinking these masks are unnecessary, and it hasn't worked. I would point to the numbers that they put out themselves. It hasn't protected law enforcement. It's caused a backlash against them, leading to more animosity and more hostile interactions,
Yeah, but
not fewer. The
but
one
that's
thing it
not their
has
fault.
done,
It's the people getting involved's fault. I mean, yeah, that's in my
well,
view
it's
that's like
it's it's
that's
a
victim
two-way
blaming.
street. I mean, it's
I
a
mean,
two-way
yeah,
street. You can't just say it's all on one side and nothing on the other. You got to have a policy that encourages compliance. And I'm saying having law enforcement look like law enforcement actually would help encourage compliance with law enforcement. And honestly, like this is something that every state and local law enforcement agency understands. They're not adopting masks. They're not taking off the uniforms. They do want to look like law enforcement, and it's only ICE that thinks that they should be exempt from this. And I would say it didn't start on day one. There were no mass protests January 21st, the people getting in the way. It has escalated because of many of the tactics that ICE has used, including masks, which are very unpopular with the public and really make ICE look less respectable. And it looks like they're trying to dodge accountability, that any state and local law enforcement officer has that name on there, Officer Smith, my face, I'm willing to own it. ICE isn't willing to do that. I don't get it. I don't think it's worked. I think they should try a different tactic.
I think we're gonna have to agree to
Yeah.
disagree on that, but I would just say that to close off before we go is that yeah, you're right. It didn't start day one or day two of the second Trump administration, but things really shifted after the riots in Los Angeles in last June, right? I mean that was really there was even protests in February in Los Angeles. I mean it wasn't inherently violent like we later on in June, but there were protests early on because there was that message of like things are different. This is not the Biden administration anymore. We're going to go after everybody. Okay. Now speaking of the Biden administration, so today in Tapachula, Chiapas, are you familiar with that city?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. So, well, you've heard of it. Yeah. So for those who are unaware of Tapachula, that is a city on Mexico's southern border. It is the basically like the only major border city on Mexico's southern border with Guatemala. There have been multiple caravans this year leaving the city because the Trump administration has pressured Mexico to keep migrants as far south away from the U.S. border as much as possible. Obviously, people who are not Mexican citizens, because it's a hub for basically every other Latin American country, South America, to gather and try to make their way north, either to work more in Mexico or to eventually reach the United States. So today, actually, coincidentally enough, another caravan is set to leave. I covered the recent caravan in June. Yeah, in June. And I was asking the migrants there, like, hey, you saying you're going to work in Mexico and other places, but are you really? Is this just a way to get you closer to the United States border? To in the case that Trump, JD Vance or Marco Rubio, whoever loses against a Democrat in 2028, is that something that you would want to do? If these policies are no longer in place, and unsurprisingly, all of them said yes. They're like, yeah, we would love to enter the United States, under a different administration. And the reason why I bring that up is like a lot of the pushback that Democrats have made towards against the Trump administration, the rest of the world is hearing that, because I know yourself, and to your credit, you said like, look, we're not for abolishing borders. I'm not for abolishing ICE, but we've seen a lot of the Democratic Socialists of America who are openly saying because of what Trump has done, we need to just completely go the opposite direction. And sure, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, they're not pushing for that, but they're going to be under even more pressure than before because these DSA candidates are in safe Democrat seats. So, they are certainly going to be in the next batch
sure.
in Congress. So there is going to be that pressure. So my idea is that people are listening. They know that they really can't enter the United States right now. One guy said, "I'm not going to pay all this money to then just get deported right away. Like it's not worth it." And actually, you yourself commented on my report. You said that we need a legal immigration plan to prevent another illegal immigration crisis. Will Democrats listen this time? So, in your view, then, how do you create a legal immigration plan to prevent another border crisis?
Yeah, I mean the first Biden administration came in, as we know, completely unprepared, using mixed messages. The borders closed, but also, you know, we are making lots of changes that sound like maybe it's not closed. I recall in February of 2021, they said we're getting rid of Remain in Mexico, and the masses came to the ports of entry and they said, Remain in Mexico is over. So that means I'm going to be able to enter
Yep.
through the port of
I,
entry.
I was there.
And
I was there in Tijuana when that happened. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, I recall, and they no, that's
No.
not what we meant. And then all those people then cross the border illegally, and so it's this type of messaging that created the problem under Biden and will certainly create. I mean, it really doesn't matter what Democrat is elected. It doesn't matter if it's DSA or another Biden or Hillary Clinton or some moderate Chuck Schumer pick. It really doesn't matter. They're not going to be Trump. That no one is going to be as anti-immigration or anti-illegal immigration as Trump. So no matter what it is, the average immigrant in Mexico is going to look at that situation and say, well, this was the worst it could possibly be. It's got to be better under this administration. So yes, you need to create the message that it's going to be legal immigration or nothing. And that is not the message that has been sent out. And what happened in 2021, it wasn't just the ports of entry were still closed. It was also all the consulates in Central and South America were all still closed. You couldn't even apply for just normal visas at that time. They didn't immediately get rid of the immigrant visa or non-immigrant visa bans. They didn't reopen the refugee program for almost 3 years. And so they really did absolutely nothing in 2021, especially, but even into 2022 and 2023 to have a legal way and tell people you got to apply for the legal way. You can't go illegally. And so we need to have efficient immigrant visa processing. We need to open up some of the regulations or limit or remove some of the regulations on some of the non-immigrant visa, work visa programs. And we need to have a robust process for people who are fleeing legitimate persecution in their home country through the refugee program, which is the way it's supposed to work. And they didn't try to set that up. They basically just said, okay, we're just going to allow asylum to take care of it. And we're going to try to deport as many people through Title 42 as we could. And it didn't work. And it probably won't work again, despite all the investments that Trump is making there. I mean, the border wall was a failure. I don't know if you were there. I mean, I'm pretty sure you
Well,
were there looking at some of these border wall, um, uh, barriers are not going to stop it. You got to have
well,
policy that
right.
actually,
That's what I was going to say. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a failure. Yeah, a border wall is only as good as its policy because like there were times where I remember in
yeah,
Hidalgo, Texas, a bunch of people came up to the gate and the gate was closed. And
yeah.
so what did Border Patrol do? Under their policies, they had to open the gate and let everyone in to be processed and eventually released. So I don't agree that the wall itself is a failure. It's only as good as its policy. So
Yeah,
I
I mean,
would
I would
I
just
would
say that a lot of people think, oh, once we build the wall, it doesn't matter who's president because then we'll have the wall. That's not the way it's going to work. You need to actually
right.
have good policies and enforceable policies. I mean, the number of people who are crossing, as you know, up to 10,000 a day during the Biden administration, it was not as if Border Patrol was not trying to detain people. They were not trying to arrest people. They couldn't hold them. There was nowhere to hold them. They were holding them in these pens outside,
Right. Yeah.
and it
But
was
that's
crazy.
because
It was crazy. But
they were being
the point,
incentivized by the policies set forth by the Biden administration. I mean, it wasn't just all of a sudden, like,
yeah. I
oh,
mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But I do think you got to have the right incentive.
wait, okay, you
I
don't
do
think
think that you have
that
to have the right
Biden
incentives.
not repealing a lot of Trump's executive orders on day one, you don't think
I
that
basically
wasn't
think none of
a poll
those
fact?
were very important.
Well, then
Because
why did the numbers change?
Title
But then why did
42,
the numbers change? That why did we see all of a sudden
yeah.
this drastic increase? Because I remember the Biden
Two reasons.
administration.
Obviously,
Well,
getting rid of
they were
Trump.
okay.
Obviously, getting rid of Trump by itself made people feel more comfortable about going to the border. The numbers, they never cut the number of expulsions under Title 4, like that, the number of expulsions kept rising month after month under Biden. They never cut it. It's just that the numbers of people who are arriving increased much faster than they were able to increase the number of expulsions. It's not like there was
Right.
a cut. It's not like you enter January 20th and there's this big cut in enforcement and then the numbers rose. It's that the number of people showing up expecting that the Biden administration would let them in
And it did.
exceeded the number of people who they could actually process for deportation. And so there is a mismatch. That's my point. Is it there's got to be a policy that encourages people to come legally that really creates the incentive structure uh, to deal with this, or you got to beat Trump. I mean, those are the alternatives for the
Right.
Democrats. They've got to beat Trump, which Biden kind of thought he could be with Title 42, and I mean, in his first press conference, he said they should all be going back, but that no, you can't actually be Trump. So you actually do need to have a different type of policy when it comes to dealing with the problem. And it is a problem, but it's got to be one that encourages people to come legally as opposed to illegally. And they really didn't even try to do that until sort of the end of 2022. They started thinking about it. Then 2023 came and they did CBP1 and uh, and
Expanded
the
parole. Yeah.
and the parole sponsorship programs. And then eventually in 2024, they had the refugee program kind of back online. But it took 4 years. And by the time they really got it going at a high level, I mean, the narrative was totally lost. And even for the immigrants who were coming, the narrative was lost because they knew so many people who
Right. Yeah.
came illegally. And that's the point. Once people hear that you cross the border illegally, that's the way you come to the United States is by crossing the border illegally. And all the people you know who came to the United States came by crossing the border illegally, then that's how you're going to come too. And so you have to
Right.
change that at the outset of an administration and say that the legal immigration way, that's the way to come, not the illegal immigration way. And so I mean, that's going to be the debate. And honestly, the way I look at it, just looking at the Democrats' messaging and what they're debating and all their policies are all around the ICE issue, which obviously I don't support everything ICE is doing, but if you're not thinking about the legal immigration side of this, and you're just thinking about, I'm going to get rid of all this crazy ICE stuff, well, if you take away all the crazy ICE stuff, then of course people are going to come to the border and think you're going to be able to come in and have a nice life here. And so you have to do something to direct people to a legal
Well,
alternative.
I mean, I would say that's their goal. I mean, with the like the DSA types, that's I mean, like I said, they just say just abolish borders. Like we're just gonna have let everyone come in, which obviously is an insane idea. So you're talking about the mass expulsions, like you have to do one or the other. You recently said, and I have it right here, the higher the number, the worse of an idea mass deportation becomes, referring to the higher number, referring to the illegal immigrant population has risen, obviously, within
Right.
the past couple of years. And you said because it's more costly and invasive to our freedoms. So, looking at that, and I brought it up because I want to further elaborate that, but looking at it, it seems like you're just saying that, because the number of illegal immigrants in the country has gotten so big, especially in these past few years, that this idea to deport them all is just a bad idea. And so basically, like the problem is so big, we should just kind of just like give up on this idea of enforcing immigration law. I mean, is that what you're saying, or what's up with that?
No, I just think that the more people there are to deport, the more costly it's going to be. I mean, it's $18,000 per deportation, according to this Department of Homeland Security, who's trying to do it as efficiently as possible. That's very expensive. So if it go from 11 million to 15 million, then that's a lot more costs on the mass deportation side. You have to be willing to keep spending and spending and spending. I mean, we've already appropriated about $250 billion to these agencies to do this immigration enforcement mass deportation thing. And that's not going to be enough. I mean, we're blowing through that money. We only have a couple years more of its, ability to even
Allocation,
spend that
yeah,
money.
right.
And it's not going to be enough. So you're going to just keep spending this money and spending this money, and you're still going to have a big population in the country illegally. And so my point is, the higher the number, the more expenses are going to have to be imposed. The other aspect of it is less obvious, but we know how many immigrants are in our prisons and jails, or at least we have a pretty good idea from the Census Bureau. So if the population of free immigrants is much bigger than we think it is, let's say there's 10, Trump says there's 10 million more than what the best estimates from the Census Bureau numbers would indicate. Well, if there's 10 million more, I mean, their incarceration rates would be through the floor. I mean, they basically look like the most law-abiding group in the entire United States. So there's a more subtle point here is that when you're inflating the numbers and saying there's 25 or there's 50 million, well, you have to reconcile that with the known facts in a way that makes sense. And if you just keep inflating the number of people and there's so many that are hiding here, then you have to also say, well, there's only so many people in jail. And at some point, it doesn't become realistic for them to have an incarceration rate 90% below the U.S. citizen population.
Well, see, I'm glad you brought that up, the incarceration rate, because I mean, just as we've seen, Fairfax County is like constantly in the news all the time because of the crimes being committed. I mean, right now, I think what was it? If illegal immigrants are at least 50% of the murder rate for this year. You appeared alongside
Yeah.
during a hearing along the
Sure.
DA Steve
Yeah.
Descano. You don't think that part of that, not saying, this idea if there's, we know how many are in the jails and, if they're not in jail, then where are they? You don't think that some of that can't be explained by these, district attorneys who are one, I mean, you're not going to get an argument out of me that I think we actually have an under incarceration rate problem for US citizens, but that certainly seems to be applied to illegal immigrants as well, where they take their immigration status into account of whether or not they're going to actually pursue any significant charges that results in incarceration, where as opposed to maybe just giving them probation, or in some cases, the cases are dropped. So, Fairfax County is a prime example of that, where Descano campaigned saying that, yeah, I will take that into account. And on top of that, they have their trust plan where they don't honor ICE detainers for state charges. They only do it for federal charges and judicial warrants, which, as I'm sure you know, it certainly doesn't apply to a lot, many of the cases that an illegal immigrant might be brought up on charges on. So you
Yeah.
don't think that wouldn't partially explain the lack of an incarceration rate for illegal immigrants?
Yeah, so just starting with the baseline, immigrants in the Census Bureau statistics, they're about 70% less likely to be incarcerated. So there's an enormous gap just to begin
Well,
with.
but
Um,
is that differentiating between legal and illegal?
no, it's not. If you
So
look
okay.
at just illegal, it's not as good. It's still pretty darn good, 50% less likely. But you're right. There are some policies in some cities that look like maybe they're, being favorable to people who are in the country illegally. I would say for every one of those policies, there's about 100 that are discriminatory against the illegal immigrant criminals, particularly in Texas. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to get bond if you're in the country illegally and you're arrested for any type of crime in Texas. So there are many conservative states. That's where we actually seen the majority of the increase in the population. But even in the California, I mean, they're not going to treat them differently. They're letting the U.S. citizen out on the
Yeah,
street.
no, I'm
Just,
saying I
I
agree
mean,
that
you,
that's a
you're letting the
problem.
U.S.
Yeah,
citizen criminals out on the street too with
yeah,
with a slap.
that's not
So
good.
what's happening in New York and California. I think a lot of people, when they hear the stories of New York and California on what they're doing when it comes to bond and letting people out pending trial, despite heinous crimes. I mean, that's not something they're doing specifically for immigrants. That they're doing that for everyone, and they're just not looking at someone's immigration status.
Yeah,
And
but that's
so,
that does skew the results. And I would just say, not to interrupt, but I would just say that just on principle, there should not be any crimes committed by illegal immigrants in the country, just because
yeah,
as I'm sure you hear a lot, they shouldn't be here in the first place. So, they're
yeah.
they're taking
Well,
that extra step
yeah,
of being here unlawfully,
yeah,
oftentimes crossing illegally. Fine, yeah, sure, they might have their visa revoked, they might have their TPS revoked,
yeah,
but in most cases they're here, they cross over illegally,
yeah.
knowing that, and then they go on and to commit, whatever, right? So I think there's just there's that disconnect where where your side says, well, actually the rate's a lot lower. Everyone's thinking, well, and other people are thinking, well, the rate should be zero, like that in the
Yeah.
ideal world, in the perfect world. And obviously, like
Well,
it's not going to
well,
be zero, but it should be as there should be policies that doesn't encourage people to come here, like we did under Biden,
sure.
to where the point where that number is as low as it possibly can be.
Well, I mean, I agree it should be as low as it should could possibly be. I support deporting people who commit crimes, and unfortunately, we don't have a Department of Homeland Security that's laser focused on that. I mean, they're not enforcing the Lake and Riley Act. They're supposed to be going after and capturing people who are fugitives, who have committed these heinous crimes. They're explicitly, intentionally going to Home Depot and just doing mass
So
roundups in
so
random
you're saying
locations.
that there's no people with criminal backgrounds doing day labor
No, I'm saying it's much more
because when I
effective. It's much more effective to go after actual criminals instead of people who are going to work. Yes, you're going to find, a criminal once in a while at any job site or any place in the entire country, but targeted enforcement. I mean, even Tom Homan has said targeted enforcement works better than indiscriminate enforcement. And so they do want people to be going after people who have committed crimes. If there's someone on the loose who's committed a crime and violated our rights, we should want our law enforcement to prioritize them and go and get them. And if they haven't gotten them, they shouldn't get distracted by, doing random stops of people who haven't committed any
addi-
serious offense.
any
So
additional
that's the
offense.
way I see it. But look, I do think the situation is misdescribed when it comes to this idea that we should have zero immigrants who ever do any bad crimes or any, that's impossible. I mean, it's a population of 50 million people. Of course, some of them are going to do uh, uh, commit a crime. I mean,
Right.
that's sensible. Does it make the country safer if we don't have any of those people just to avoid that one crime? No, it doesn't, because you measure your likelihood of being a victim of a crime by the crime rate, not by the absolute number of crimes. No one decides what city to live in based on the absolute number of crimes. New York has way more crimes and murders than St. Louis, but the homicide rate in St. Louis is way higher than the homicide rate in New York City. So you look at the rate if you care about your likelihood of being a victim.
Right. Well, I would just say again, it just points to this idea where I mean, but because the conversation has changed a lot because of the vast amount of people that came over in such a short amount of time, right? Because even before 2021, Tren de Aragua did not have basically didn't exist in the United States. It was all basically South America, Central America. But because we let in so many people and they followed, then yeah, we have a case like Lincoln Riley. We're still having cases were TDA members or other gang members from other countries that came in during that time. And so to me, again, you talk about this idea where like, well, maybe the border would have still kind of happened no matter what. But I just view it as I think that if Biden didn't touch the executive orders that Trump had in place, there certainly wouldn't have been the numbers that we would have seen. That's what I just believe,
Yeah.
and we wouldn't have had the kind of the secondary and third effects that we're still seeing because like yes obviously not every single person that's coming across is a hardened gang member,
Yeah.
but to me the policy is like, well, then that's why everything should be dedicated towards dissuading people from making that journey because people are going to come no matter what. As long as the United States is the United States as it is, of course people are going to come. The question is whether the US government is going to encourage them or discourage them. The Trump administration is very much discouraging them through any means possible. A lot of people think the tactics are not good, such as yourself. I think that, hey, because we've been through this once, it's very possible we can go through it again. How much is that going to be dissuaded based on what the Trump administration has done? So,
I,
sorry, you can go ahead.
just one more point on the Biden and criminals point. I think it's undersold how much Title 42 incentivized criminals to cross under both Trump and Biden. December 7th, 2020, I've looked at the daily numbers. You can look at them. I have a post about it. We're the highest in the history of the Border Patrol, the number of individuals with prior criminal convictions who are crossing. Under Title 42, because it was immediate expulsion without any kind of detention and without any kind of prosecution, anyone who had a prior criminal conviction could now cross the border without risking criminal prosecution for illegal reentry. And so we kept Title 42 in place, the US government did until 2023. That was a huge mistake. I mean, that was a massive mistake. It was a mistake under Trump and it was a mistake under Biden. Biden tried to get rid of it in 2022. The Republican states forced him to continue it. That was a huge mistake. That as soon as they got rid of it, the number of gotaways went down, the number of criminals went down, and so it you do need to think about incentives for different populations. For the people who are coming for peaceful purposes, we should have legal ways to come to apply and get vetted and screen them in as thorough a way as possible. But for people who've committed serious crimes and are trying to cross the border, there should be punishment. And we were lacking in both dimensions under both Trump one and under Biden. And I think we can do much better. We can have legal policies, but also ways to address people who are coming illegally.
All right. So last question, because I know we got to wrap up here. So because because you've been hammering about, okay, like we just got to have legal pathways for X, Y, and Z. And one of the reasons why, I think, Trump's base in particular is against even against legal immigration, is because we've seen kind of the emergence of all these different ethnic enclaves that are really seemingly not assimilating. One of the, we could take Springfield, Ohio. You can look at Dearborn, Michigan. Because obviously there's always been, enclaves in different cities, but it really seems like there's, it's when you import large populations at one time, there is just, I mean, they kind of stay that way because that's just human nature, right? But we also see like second generation immigrants, and I see this as well in the Latino community, where they just hate the United States. And that's why we kind of see with the rise of the DSA, as we talked about, we have that there's that DSA member in New York City whose family fled Peru because of the Shining Path communist group. And here he is being a prominent member of a communist group and doing everything that basically what they were trying to do in Peru through less violent means, at least for right now. But so it's this idea of, okay, so even with legal immigration, there's like all these problems because it's being done in seemingly just like an open valve way. And look, President Trump ran on like reducing immigration as a whole. Yes, focusing on illegal immigration, but reducing all
Yep.
immigration as a whole. So that's why I don't see what he's doing with the legal pathways as like very surprising. So then what in your view then, what makes someone an American?
Yeah, I mean, an American is a citizen of the United States with full rights as a citizen, and there's obviously I have my definition. I think libertarianism is correct, and I think the founders' philosophy is correct. So there's a deeper principle at stake here, but people who come to this country and have been coming. We've had over 130 million immigrants come to the United States since the founding of this country, and they have overwhelmingly adopted whatever American values meant at that time. You can look at Catholics who came when the Pope was issuing all kinds of invective against liberal democracy and the First Amendment and freedom of religion. And there was legitimate fear at the time that, oh, the Catholics are going to come and they're going to overwhelm the country and create, their own school system, and they're not going to support American values and American democracy. And it was wrong then, and I think it's just as wrong now. Many of these people just arrived, so some of the people you're talking about are recent immigrants. Some of these people are old immigrants, but on average, immigrants are adopting American values. I mean, you can look at the General Social Survey. We've done a lot of work looking at the assimilation on all measures of policy. I do think that the Democratic Party has a way of elevating the worst views and the worst immigrants from a policy perspective to the front of the line. Whereas there are many immigrants who love the United States, love freedom, and unfortunately, they're being pushed out of the Republican Party by a group of people who think that what matters is how long your ancestors were here rather than your beliefs and values. And that's unfortunate because that's not compatible with the American tradition. It's not even compatible with the Republican tradition. You should look at what Lincoln said he was doing when he created the Republican Party. It was a place open to really anyone of any ethnic background as long as they believed in the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And I think we need to get back to that, not just as a country, but as the Republican Party and really both parties have drifted away from the founders' vision.
And I mean, yes, but again, the problem is that again, we're seeing this um I hate to like just like pick on what seemingly like picking on different things, but like you look at what happens in like Dearborn, right, where it starts off as industrial town. It's basically defines of what like the American dream is, and now it's turned into a lot of my veteran friends with global war and terror. They're like, yeah, you roll down, it looks like you need to roll there in a Humvee, up armored Humvee. And there's some problems with that. And then you look at like, for example, the recent senatorial election results, and 90% of the population or of the Muslim population in the state went for El Said. And it's just because, again, human nature, you're going to go with your tribe at the end of the day. And I think, El Said is definitely more of like the very progressive DSA type left. And it's like, do we want that? Do we want that in the Senate? Like, do we want that kind of views representing the country? And then you look at like Ilhan Omar, you look at Dalia Ramirez in Illinois, who she said that she's proud to be a Guatemalan first, then a U.S. citizen while speaking to this conference in Mexico City. I mean, like that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big problem, right? Like and so I understand where people are coming from, and that's why I think people say, well, my family has been here for generations because it's this idea I believe is like we have a more vested interest in the direction and well-being of the country because we want to preserve what that has been that allowed my family sure to flourish. And we're seeing all these people who are seemingly putting their ethnic priorities or like identities or baggage, a lot of it's baggage, first over the general welfare of the United States and the communities.
Yeah, and I mean, I could cite, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's born in Somalia,
Right.
uh, Daniel DiMartino, who's Venezuelan. Works at the Manhattan Institute, conservative. I mean, there are some conservatives who are immigrants and children of immigrants, and unfortunately, the Republican Party doesn't elevate those voices the same way that the Democratic Socialists do because they are so, race obsessed and background obsessed that, this is, such an important feature for them. But, I would say the Republican Party, like what you're describing, yeah, it is human nature, but we should be, rather than going full anti-immigrant, we should be encouraging people to adopt libertarian or conservative values, and regardless of where they were born, And unfortunately, the Republican Party is just not interested in it. I can't remember a time. I've been working on this for over a decade. I've advocated for this. I've said this to many Republican audiences. None of them have really made a significant effort. I would say the Trump administration in 2024 actually did a lot more than prior administrations to reach out to Latino communities across the United States, both naturalized citizens and others. And he did quite well. I mean, if you look at
Yep.
the numbers, I mean, he probably won naturalized citizen men, did slightly worse with naturalized citizen women. So it's not as if Republicans can never compete. Now he's getting absolutely destroyed because they hate his immigration policies again, because they weren't expecting him to go this hard against legal immigration. But
Well,
if you
I would
begin to
attribute
have
it to that them not paying attention, but okay.
I agree. I think
Yeah.
that's true too, but also like he wasn't going to these communities and saying, "This is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to cut off all legal immigration." He was going to say, "I was going to bring crime down. I was going to bring jobs up. I'm going to bring inflation down." That was a good message. It was a winning message. They should have just stuck with that message and not done all this anti-legal immigration stuff that you're talking about. So it's not as if I mean, really, every time I have this conversation, it's like we can never compete. We just in 2024 had a very successful election competing for naturalized citizen votes. I think we should have continued on that track as opposed to adopting the full anti-immigration agenda that some in the Republican Party want, but that's really not. I still think it's a minority view among Republicans to go that far.
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, because you have like the congresswoman down here in South Florida, basically promoting amnesty, and that's. I mean, before it might have been a starter, but certainly now a non-starter for on the Republican side, and I think for good reason too, just because we tried that in the '80s with Reagan, and that didn't solve anything. But David, thank you so much for this conversation. I know there's a
Yeah,
lot to go over, and so
sure.
hopefully we could have
Anytime.
another one in the future. So where could people, if people
Yeah.
want to find the opposing view, where could they find that?
Cato.org. CATO.
There you go, good company man right there. So thank you very much everyone for tuning in and for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.